some and gray on others. What's it say on there?
Time.
Time. In our first aid kits, you might want to throw in a Sharpie marker. Those little nubby ones are great. You want to write down the time you put the tourniquet on. I usually put the date and the time. If they're going to go to a hospital, hopefully they're there the same day. In the military, sometimes, unfortunately, it's like the next day, and that's not good. You also should put a T on their forehead, just a big-ass T, and you can write the time up there if you want to. But when someone comes in and I see a big T on their forehead, I know they have a tourniquet on their body somewhere. So in a chaotic situation, if the tourniquet's black and they're wearing all black or camo, or when they're dirty and muddy and they got a tourniquet on, sometimes it's missed. If they don't do their blood sweep properly, we're going to go over what a blood sweep is. Okay, that's a buzzword that you guys need to know how to do. What do you got?
So you were talking about checking the pulse on the wrist. Do you ever check the pulse on their neck?
Yep. So with neck pulses, that's your carotid pulse. You cannot put a tourniquet on the neck. It seems funny for some and obvious for others, but really you can't. I put a tourniquet on a neck once, but I wasn't using it as a tourniquet. I just didn't have any more wraps, and I needed to put some kind of device on there. I would have used tape. I would have used a tree branch if it was bendable enough. Advanced classes, you learn how to use the stuff in your first aid kit, and you're taught to have a good first aid kit. Then you're taught how to make stuff work that you don't have. And it can be urban environments, cars, schools, and that kind of stuff, like extension cords, seat belts. If you can get to a vehicle, man, it's a gold mine of cool stuff. There's usually some seat belts in there you can use. You can cut them down the middle, and seat belts are usually wide. You can kind of split those. You can find jumper cables, so you can tear the wiring harness out of the car. You can cut the floorboard or the seat fabric and make strips for improvised tourniquets. For you guys hiking, if you don't have a car, these pants that unzip at the knee are great. You can cut your own pants. I usually have people start with their shirt, because it's usually society kind of deems it a little bit more appropriate to run around with no shirt than no pants. You kind of have sometimes some explaining to do if you're running around with no pants on. But where were we? We're talking about tourniquets and how to put them on and how tight to get them. And you put them on as tight as you need to for the pulse to go away. You mark them, because we only really want them on about an hour. So if you're 4 or 5 hours or a day's hike from somewhere and you don't have a sat phone or a radio or Garmin Mini or whatever you guys are using for comms or communications, there's sort of a problem there that's going to happen. Okay, that the potentially whatever's downstream of the tourniquet might not get enough blood, and that appendage might have to be amputated later. So that's the risk of tourniquets, and that's why 15 years ago we said don't ever put a tourniquet on, they'll lose their arm. That really is not the case. There's plenty of people running around right now, Afghanistan, Iraq, that had tourniquets on, that have full function of their hands and their feet and legs, and that had tourniquets that saved their life, because we know you can bleed out in minutes, if not less than a minute. So if I have a big pumping femoral artery bleed and I'm jacked up because I'm hiking and I'm in a crazy stressful situation, my normal blood pressure is 120/80, but I'm all jacked up. So now my blood pressure is 180 over like 90 or 180 over 110. And my heart's now not resting anymore. It's not 60 or 80 beats a minute. It's like 160 beats a minute. So it's pumping hard and fast. It is not going to take more than about 45 seconds before my body pumps out a half of my blood supply. So it is crucial that you stop the bleeding with direct pressure, just like stopping your nosebleed. Sometimes you have to use your foot, sometimes you have to use your knee, sometimes you just use your finger while you're getting your tourniquet out, and then you get your tourniquet on. And you need to get that on quick, and that's why we do drills. Like in some classes, I would say, right leg, and then you'd have to put your tourniquet on, and there'd be some kind of penalty for you not to get your tourniquet on. With that, I know this is a lot, and you'll remember some of it, and that's okay. Like I said, it's kind of a crash course. When you have your first aid kit on you, you want to get it in a place where you can reach it with both hands, right? So if I wear my tourniquet on my right hip, that's okay, because I'm a left-handed shooter, so this is where all the work happens, kind of right here, and the rifle goes here, and then it goes here, and the pistol's here. Usually my tourniquet's kind of around this area here. I can get it with this hand, I can get it with this hand, I can reach around and get it with this hand. There is sort of a no-go zone back here where I can't quite reach it, kind of like right in there where it's really hard for me to reach. And when you're wearing plates, you don't have a lot of mobility when you're wearing big rifle plates and stuff like that. So the moral of the story is just make sure you can get it with both hands, because you never know what side's going to be injured. I talked about how legs sometimes need 2 tourniquets, and sometimes arms just need 1 tourniquet. Any questions so far?
So if like someone's shoulder or someone's arm gets like blown off,
Mm-hmm.
and like there's like not anything to put on the arm, like
Yeah, a great question. That's everyone's fear. That's our worst nightmare. That's called a junctional wound. So it's at the junction of the appendage or the arm and the junction of the torso, and it's hard to get something in there. So if you have a junctional wound, like in the armpit or the axilla, it means fancy Greek for saying armpit. Anything in here is really bad. Sometimes you can get a tourniquet up in there, raise their arm out. Sometimes you have to kind of wrap it around this way and go over there, but it's not going to really do what a tourniquet does. It's not going to really stop the blood flow. What you have to do with those injuries is you have to pack it with a hemostatic agent. So have you guys heard of QuikClot? They sell it at Walmart. It comes in a little pack. I actually left mine back there. It's going to be a pack like this. It's going to say QuikClot on it. It's gauze. It's like a cotton gauze, but it has this clotting agent adhered to it. And when it gets wet, it's like someone took toothpaste on some gauze and they let the toothpaste dry and then they folded it up. And when you unfold it, it gets kind of flaky. And if you hold it with wet hands, it activates the stuff and it turns into kind of this goopy mess. But in your first aid kits, you should have some kind of clotting agent. There's QuikClot, that's a brand name, and there's Helox, which is like another type of clotting agent that actually works a little bit better in cold environments, and most people are going to that than QuikClot. They're about $40 a pack, and they're in a little pack. You should have at least one of those, if not 2, in your family, vehicle, camping first aid kit. It is kind of pricey, shelf life. I would use it forever. I don't care if it said it expired 20 years ago. I would keep it. I would probably label it as something I would use really like later on. It doesn't really go bad, but I believe the shelf life is 5 years on the package, okay? But if you had an injury here, you'd open it up and you'd take that like gauze out, and it's like this long ribbon of gauze. And you'd take your finger and you'd kind of twist that gauze on your finger, just like a shirt. Or if you don't have that gauze, you cut a strip off your shirt, take your shirt off, take your shears or your knife and cut strips out of your shirt. Take that shirt, start shoving it in that wound with that finger and get it as deep as you can. Now that artery runs out this way, so you kind of want to sort of feel if you can kind of get your finger on and stop the bleeding, because once again, stop the nosebleed with just the minimal amount of pressure, right? So try and get in there and stop the nosebleed, figure out where that puncture is, and then put your gauze right on top of it. You're going to pack as much in there as you possibly can. It's like packing a sleeping bag or a tent inside the package that it came with. If you don't start off doing it right, you're going to have a hell of a time getting it in there. If you take your time and get your tent and your tent thing or your sleeping bag and your stuff sack, if you really start shoving it in there tight from the very beginning, you will get the whole sleeping bag shoved into the stuff sack, right? But if you just shove it in there willy-nilly with a bunch of air in there, you're not really pushing until halfway through, you will have a hell of a time getting the whole entire sleeping bag in that tiny little stuff sack. So in this particular example, the wound is the stuff sack and the gauze is the sleeping bag, and you want to jam it in there from the base as much as you possibly can until you get all filled up. You can't get any more in there. Then leave a big wad on top, like about a half a fist of a wad of packing on top, and then you're going to wrap the hell out of that with an ace bandage, or then maybe put a tourniquet on it. And what you're doing is you're using this big massive ball of gauze to put direct pressure over the wound. If you can't pack it, you're going to have to hold it by hand. You're going to have to stick your thumb in there, and if they're conscious, they're going to not like you because it's going to hurt like hell. But your goal is to stop the bleeding, right? So junctional wounds, super scary, super hard to get the blood to stop, advanced skill. Luckily, they're a little bit on the rarer side, but that would be kind of up here in the arm crease, in the armpit, and that would be down here in the groin. Groin is a little bit more dangerous because this big pumping femoral artery is bigger, so you're going to lose a lot more blood than you would from something up here in the arm, okay? And the same thing with the neck. That carotid pulse, everyone should feel your carotid pulse here with those 2 calibrated fingers, and you guys should start to feel other people's pulses every once in a while, you know, like friends, or if you have kids. I mean, it's weird. It's hard to find other people's pulses, but you got a carotid pulse on both sides here. If you want to knock someone out, you'll just hold both. That's how most chokes work. You just take a tiny little bit of pressure. You can go behind someone and just take your 2 fingers and just pinch off those carotid arteries. It doesn't take too long before they get this sort of weird sensation, and if you held it long enough, they'd pass out. So carotids, radial, you do have one here in the middle of your arm. Bend. Little babies, they're fat and chubby, and they got a lot of fat in their skin. You got to do the brachial. That's a fancy word for arm. It's kind of right in this groove here. You can sometimes feel it there. You got a femoral pulse right here in the groin. You got a popliteal pulse right behind the knee. And then you got one on the ankle and one on the top of the foot. And you got, we won't go through all those, but there's different pulses that you can feel to make sure you have the blood supply turned off, okay? So if we're sticking to our TCCC M, our massive hemorrhage, mainly arterial bleeding, we're going to use our tourniquet and direct pressure and our hemostatic agent like Quick Clot, okay? Any questions so far? I know we're going super fast.
If you were to see if somebody was dying, like, what would you, or like to see if they were already dead, how would you check their pulse?
Good question. So, you know, like if it were sort of a car crash and it was a bus full of 8 people, and so on the side of the road, the first thing you want to do is make sure the scene is safe. In the military, you want to do like a 360-degree security, and they say, you'll hear a buzzword that says "get off the X." The X is if we're taking fire from that general direction and they're shooting at us here, this is my X. The enemy is shooting at the X. I need to get off the X. I can't provide self-aid or buddy aid until I am in a safer place. It does no good to be shot again or be killed here because I did not get off the X. And that is very common for people to do when they're shot at or scared, is you'll kind of like startle, sort of look at the direction of where the thing's coming from. You kind of freeze a little bit because you don't really know where to go, and sometimes you don't know where it came from. But the rule is kind of get off the X, provide self-care, fix yourself first, and then get back in the fight in the military, finish the fight, neutralize the threat, and then look around and start fixing your friends. And when you start to look around to fix your friends, whether it's like a military situation or if it's the side of the road, the first thing you want to do is just sort of get a general idea after you figure out the scene's safe. I'm not going to get run over by a car. I'm not going to get shot. Okay, I'm going to look around and I'm looking for color, and I'm looking for people that aren't looking dead. Okay, because you have to triage, and this is where it gets a little bit more advanced. But you're kind of start talking to people. Anyone that can move, you're like, hey, if you can move, drag yourself over there, start fixing yourself, okay? And then the people that can are going to start crawling over there. And then you're going to see the people here that can't crawl. And then there's going to be people awake and not awake. And you're probably actually going to work with the people that are awake before you work with the people that aren't awake, because they might already be dead. You're going to take care of the easier fixes. Unless you see like some pulsatile spurting blood out of this guy's leg, then I'm going to try and treat that while I'm doing my other stuff. So I'll go over to him and I'll just kind of grab onto that thing, put some pressure on it, maybe drop a knee on it. And then I'm looking around and I'm trying to find his first aid kit, and I'll just get a tourniquet on that while I'm assessing everybody else. But a little bit more advanced stuff. But the color of their skin, if they can respond to you, are your 2 biggest clues of how they're doing. Let's say you come up on 1 person or 2 people, and it's a side of the road, so no one's shooting at you, but you're still doing your scene safety, and you're like, damn, like there's like semi trucks flying by here, it's dark, we're gonna get run over by a truck, I'm gonna have to move this guy. So you gently, because you don't know if his neck's broke, you drag him like 6 to 10 feet or so off the road. Now that your scene's safe, there's no power lines coming down, and then you're like, okay, what the heck happened to this guy? The first thing you guys want to do is just ask them, hey, what the hell's wrong with you? What happened to you? They'll tell you most of the time where they're hurting the most. If they're in shock, which we'll talk about briefly, they'll be all white. They'll be freaked out. They'll start talking nonsense. They'll be like, oh, man, I got to get the cookies out of the oven. You're like, dude, there are no cookies here. Oh, I got to get the cookies out. And they're like, they will fixate on that thing. I got to get my kids from daycare. Maybe it was a wife on the way to a daycare, get her kids. and she's missing an arm, right? You're like, holy, I see what's wrong. I guess she's missing an arm here from this accident. And she will just not even realize her arm's gone. And she will just start mumbling. She'll look white and she'll look kind of out of it. And she'll say, hey, man, I'm getting my kids from daycare. And she'll wander right into the road and get whacked by a semi-truck because she's in shock. Most of the time, people are aware enough to listen to you a little bit, and you can bring them back to reality.